Great.
And this works. We're back to 1961 technology. Okay. Glad to hear it.
We had those megaphones back then.
That's it.
Carl, thank you so much for your kind words. Good morning, everybody. Carl, in your book, and I don't know, we're going to assume everybody's read Carl's book, but just in case they haven't, in your book, the concept of it is, it's called Chasing History, but it isn't really like a scope of your career. It's really focused on the very early part of your career. And when you first got into journalism, when you were still at Blair, actually working for the Star, there were really only three places for people that wanted to get into journalism as a profession, that for long term they could really do it. One obviously was print media, and the other were, I won't call them new, but the electronic media at that time was really limited to radio and television. And to get a job in journalism in those areas, you pretty much had to have some kind of a CV that included print media with some credibility and things like that too. Obviously, things have changed over the years, and you started at a beginning position, and you had to kind of work your way up, the ladder and those kinds of things, paying your dues at each one. Today, there's a different world out there for where these students and these opportunities are going to be. And I'm wondering if you could give some advice or insight to these students about where those opportunities are, maybe how they differ from the types of things you have to do, and what preparation maybe they can be thinking about.
Let me try to set the table a little bit off of your question. And let me ask also, the students here, all of you either take journalism classes or on Silver Chips or Silver Log, et cetera, is that right? So that I understand. Great. So first let me say a word about this book called Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom. It is just out in paperback now, and I hope you do read it, because it's about this kid, me, who at the age of 16 gets the best seat in the country at a great newspaper, the Washington Star, the afternoon paper in this town in those days, a better paper in those days in many regards than the Washington Post was. And this kid, as you could see in that video a little bit, had 1 foot in the juvenile court, 1 foot in the pool hall in Silver Spring on Georgia Avenue, and about a toe in the classroom. And I was lucky enough to, I took a journalism course, as I mentioned, in 10th grade. I had some native writing abilities, and I had taken typing in the 10th grade with the girls because I was sick of shop classes. And those typing skills, among other things, enabled me to get hired at the Washington Star. My father knew somebody there who was a reporter, got me an interview there, and then on the strength of my typing and interviews, despite my foot in the juvenile court, I was able to get hired as a copy boy. And so I hope you read this book because Blair is part of it. It describes my years here at the school, or up in Silver Spring, the other part of Silver Spring where the school was located then. But it also is about my first 5 years before I go to the Washington Post. The book ends before I go to the Washington Post. It ends at the Star as I leave the Washington Star because I hadn't finished college. I'm a dropout. And the Star, even though they had made me a reporter in the summers, they wanted me to finish college, and that wasn't about to happen. So I went and worked in Elizabeth, New Jersey as a reporter for another year and a half, and I won a bunch of prizes and then came back home and got hired at the Washington Post. But the book is very much about everything I know pretty much about journalism, about reporting. I learned in the 5 years covered in this book from age 16 to 21 at the Star. And if you've read, how many people here have read All the President's Men or seen the movie of it? You'll see how this book fits hand in glove with it, because the basic techniques and pretty much everything, as I say, I learned at the Star and moved. That experience informed a large part of what Bob Woodward and I did during Watergate. So I start by giving you that background and a word about reporting in journalism. I think that the basics as described in this book, Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom, and in All the President's Men, those basics about what reporting is, how you do it, and what good journalism, good reporting really is, remain the same as when I went to the Star in 1960. And there's a phrase that Bob Woodward and I started using. We were asked during the reporting on Watergate, well, what do you call this reporting that you're doing? Because we were attacked by the Nixon White House, who said we were slandering the president, that we were engaged in innuendo and using anonymous sources to hide behind lies. Tried to make our conduct in Watergate the issue rather than the conduct of the President of the United States, something you all might still be seeing, might have noted especially during the Trump presidency, but it's pretty much a feature of all presidencies to some extent, try and make the conduct of the press the issue, some people. And those things that you see in the movie of All the President's Men that are described in this book, knocking on doors at night to go visit the people who have the information that we thought might help us understand what had happened in Watergate. Those basic techniques are still or ought to be the basis of what good reporting really is. And this version, and what Woodward and I defined it as at the time in an interview some 50 years ago, was the best obtainable version of the truth. And so we've used that definition in the subsequent half century to talk about what good reporting, good journalism really is, the best obtainable version of the truth. But then I also write in this book what I think, and it's a joyous, rollicking book about this kid, as I say, that gets this incredible seat in the Capitol of the United States at the age of 16. But it's also very serious about this time in history, time in the civil rights movement. It's 100 years, my 5 years at the Star bracket the Civil War, 1960 to 65, by exactly 100 years. Civil War, 1860, 65 period. And so I write in this book what I think are the most important words in it, and that is that the truth is not neutral. And I give as an example the coverage by great white, mostly Southern reporters of the civil rights movement in that period where people were dying in the South, trying to register to vote. Ku Klux Klan, killing people. And so I say, truth is not neutral. A lynching is not neutral. And I think we've had over the past 75 years in journalism a kind of mythology about, quote, being objective. How many of you all have? It's not about being objective. It seems to me that reporting in journalism is the most subjective of acts. That the first thing is, maybe the most important thing a journalistic institution or a reporter does is to decide what is news. That's a very subjective notion. And yes, we have an obligation that the basis of our work is grounded in fairness. But fairness to the people we're writing about, but especially fairness to the truth. And that too is subjective, based on what our reporting, based on those people we talk to knocking on their doors, what we've learned. And I'm going to give you a quick example that I hope you keep with you. Let's say there's a bank robbery up in Silver Spring, in the business district. And somebody goes up and there's still some tellers in the bank. There's still some cash in the bank. It's not all done online. And comes with a gun and says to the people who have the money in the bank, give me all the money you got and put it in this bag, or I'm going to kill you. So they put the money in the bag. Guy stuffs it in there, runs out with his gun. He's gone and he disappears for the next 2 months. There's a video camera that's recorded all of this. 2 months later, the police find this guy. He's 50 miles away from Silver Spring. He says, I've been here on this country house with my relatives here, friends. They all vouched that I've been here the whole time, that I was nowhere near Silver Spring on the date of that robbery. Here's my diary that I kept every day, and here's my lawyer to tell you all my movements. And they come up with this great alibi. But I'm the reporter, and I've got this videotape that I've been shown by the police. Am I going to give 50% of that story, which I know is a lie, to that alibi, and 50% to the videotape, or am I going to give 75, 80, 90% of weight to the videotape, to the real evidence that I know exists? That's the best obtainable version of the truth. It's not neutral. So I hope you keep that with you. And because I think it informs everything that we need to do. And we did that during Watergate. We never articulated it. We articulated the idea of the best obtainable version of the truth. But we did not articulate this idea. If you go back and look at those stories, they're fair. There are 200 stories we wrote. They're online if you want to look at them, the Washington Post website, in the first year after the Watergate break-in. And yes, that reporting led to congressional hearings. It figures very prominently in why the President of the United States was forced to resign. But all of that came because the truth was not neutral. And if you read those stories, you see how we focus not on the denials of the White House. They denied every story we wrote. And we gave them their say, but we did not give 50% of the story to their denials. We gave 90%, I'm speaking generally here of the story to what happened. So I'm going to leave it at that to set the table, and I hope you keep that with you, because great journalism remains the same today. And both Bob Woodward and I have taught in college, at the college level, with journalism students. And we've both observed this idea that too many people, young people coming into journalism, have, that what it's really about is going to Google. Look, if we had had Google at the time of Watergate, we would have saved ourselves a lot of time and a lot of trouble of looking up addresses and getting biographical information on people that we had to do elsewhere. But we got the information by banging on those people's doors at night, by using common sense. That's the way you're going to get good stories. That's the way you're going to find out what is news. That's the way you're going to get to the best obtainable version of the truth. You're not going to get to it from Google. You're going to get to it from getting out of the office and going to see people who you think have information that will lead you to whatever the best obtainable version of the truth is. So why don't we go from there, Mark? Thank you.
I just want to kind of a follow-on type of a question there, because you mentioned Watergate, obviously, and you went from being a reporter, and then you got involved with Bob Woodward and wound up being a Pulitzer Prize-winning team, and so now you're at a celebrity or status, or almost like an icon, and you get platforms like this one, and public platforms and other places because of your celebrity, because of what you've accomplished. Now you're a best-selling author, of course, in your own right, and have been. When you get a platform like this, whether it's something with the students or just in general, do you feel that you now have an opportunity to talk about what Carl Berstein thinks about things and use that platform to talk about what you think is right and wrong, or do you try to keep things focused on the reporter side of yours?
I think the answer is both, but the two things merge. And it gets back again to this idea, reporters are people. They're not automatons. And they have the values that come to them through their upbringing, through their training as reporters. So when I speak publicly, and I have done a lot of commentary, especially through the Trump years on CNN, elsewhere, but I try to convey that what I'm saying is repertorially based. I remember the first time I said on the air, and it was before anybody had said it. I was on the air one night and I said, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is a serial liar. And I stopped and said, I'm amazed to hear myself say that on television. But it's repertorially grounded. I've talked to dozens of members, Republicans, in the House and the Senate, who point out to me time and time again, and they call the President of the United States in private a serial liar. Sounds pejorative, but it's not. It's repertorially accurate. But yes, I'm a public person as well, and I hope I bring the experience of my life, including my beliefs, to what I say to people, and that also partly informs my reporting, but my reporting is based on what I learned knocking on those doors. I still do it. That's what Bob does. If you've read his books or know about his books on every presidency since the Nixon presidency, all from figuratively knocking on those doors, going to see people in their homes, getting as many sources as we can. And so all of this informs what I say publicly. But if I say something, and I'm going to give an example here that I've read some of the clips in Silver Chips about the possibility of changing the name of this high school from Montgomery Blair. And what I'm about to say is both from my formation as a person and a reporter, as well as my understanding of history. And I think it would be an affront to history, an affront to the truth, to change the name of this school because Montgomery Blair owned, perhaps, or did a slave, more than one slave, perhaps. The Blair family, going back, had been slaveholders. And I think we've reached a point in the debate about names, historicism, where we need to be truthful. We need to be sensitive to the horror of this country being founded on slavery, the institution that made it possible for this country to survive and thrive through the horrible, horrible history and reliance on slavery. But I think there's also a necessity to judge people by their life in their own times, to report accurately, whether in the history books, whether in stories we do about George Washington or Montgomery Blair, and what their lives were, and the context of their era. I think we can have another debate on the role and statuary to Confederate generals. That's a little different, or a lot different perhaps, in the way we memorialize people in this country. But in terms of Montgomery Blair, in terms of this state came very late to abolishing slavery. Even though it was in the Union, there were still slaves in this state, I believe. You can check this through 1864, I think. Might be a little off on that. But let's just take a look in context of the life of Montgomery Blair as part of the Lincoln administration, which administration abolished slavery, the emancipation. But I think getting lost in the whole debate over names is truth. And judging people in terms of the context of their lives and when they were lived. And it would be, as I say, an affront to history to rename the school. Put in a plaque on this building that he owned a slave. But abolish the history of this institution, of this family, of this man? I don't think so. And I think it's a huge thing we're coming to grips with in this country, and it's long overdue that we, in the 21st century, and especially through our young people, look at what slavery has done to the people and its legacy, to the people that we are, to the culture that we are, to what we're hearing And I'll jump back to your question about speaking as I'm not going to use the word icon. It's not how I think of myself. But I think of myself as having had these enormous opportunities. And I would say that one of the things that I know in my judgment, listening to Donald Trump at these recent rallies, is that he, through, quote, dog whistles, and there's not too much whistling, some of it's pretty damn literal, is evoking the prejudices and the hate of people of color, African Americans, despite what he says to the contrary. And that's part of the legacy of slavery in this country. The idea that at this point in our history, we are in a cultural war, cultural warfare, still trying to adjudicate culturally our history and who we are as a people, and that so many of our people still deny our history and the horrible institution of slavery and what it has done to us. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Let me just pick up on your use of the term culture wars, because freedom of the press and freedom of expression are among the most important cornerstones of our democracy. If you're looking ahead in the next few years with the environment we're in now, what do you see as the biggest threats to maintaining this cornerstone we have of freedom of press, freedom of ideas, freedom of expression?
Well, one of the things about being a reporter is that I don't have a crystal ball. That what I do is report. And so I don't know what's going to happen. What I do know is that the First Amendment has enabled this country to have a free press through its history, unlike any other country in the world. We have nothing like the Official Secrets Act, as it's called in Great Britain, that limits the freedom of the press in a way that we're not constrained in this country. We've had many attempts to constrain and limit freedom of the press throughout our history, including, especially during the Trump years, lawsuits aimed at inhibiting freedom of the press by filing lawsuits to intimidate reporting and costing financially news institutions huge amounts of money. But that we've been engaged for some 25, 30, 35 years in this country in a kind of cold civil war, cold cultural civil war in this country over all kinds of questions, including and especially perhaps race. And Donald Trump, in his presidency, ignited. And again, I think this is repertorially sound what I'm going to say. That Trump ignited what had been a cold civil war. And we're now past the point of ignition because of the conflagration that has occurred through his presidency and continues. So I think that again, we have to go back to the nature of truth that there's an obligation that as citizens that we all have to try and parse things in as truthful a manner as we can. So I think that would be my basic answer. I have no idea how these cultural civil wars, now that we are past the point of ignition, are going to resolve. I mean, let's go back to the notion of truth. Guns in this country. There's all kinds of historical reasons we can point to how we got to the point of the insane number of guns that are held by citizens in this country. Many more millions of guns than there are people in this country. But putting aside that history, is there any reason whatsoever, and including the Second Amendment to the Constitution, is there any reason whatsoever that civilians ought to have assault weapons? Is there any purpose served by civilians having these weapons and the death and destruction they cause, other than for military and policing purposes? Is that the best obtainable version of the truth? So, should we hear from the students here? I think let's give you all a chance to ask your questions. And if you, when you get called on, if you just tell us your name. So who would like to start?
They submitted these ahead of time.
Oh, we've got advanced questions.
We got some advanced questions.
Okay.
We'll take these first because these were sent ahead by the students. It says, the first one says, going to a liberal high school, do you think it's more or less important to include an array of political opinions in your news stories?
I'm not sure what a liberal high school is. I got suspended and expelled a good number of times. Didn't strike me as being too liberal. Well, if you're covering, quote, politics, it seems to me you're going to need to include whatever facts and whatever opinions people are expressing that are relevant to the debate that your story is about. If it's if there, they just move, and the principal, Mr. Shaw, had been the principal when I was there. His successor came up to me afterwards and said, you know, when the student body picked you as the commencement speaker, he said, I went and looked up your record. I said, this is a mistake. And he said, we should have got Connie Chung. Connie being a journalist who's a few years behind and maybe not as apt to upset apple carts as I am. But I really mean it. It also, with the passage of time, I really understand, as you heard in this clip there, how formative this experience is in my life, and how much I'm a product of Silver Spring, of this institution that you all are a part of. But I also know I was glad as hell to get out of here. And but I'm glad I went through it. And I'm glad that I have this experience to be with you today and to draw on, because it is a huge part. If anybody would have told me then that so much of my life has drawn on the experience, including the pain or whatever, and the difficulty of those years in high school, and the wonder of it as well. So I want to thank you all for being here today. We are out of time, or we have a little time?
We're out of time. I know that the Silver Chips people are going to stay and do a short interview. I want to thank everybody. Carl, your book is called Chasing History, and you chased it, and you caught it in a lot of ways, and you became part of history. So how about a hand for Carl Berstein?
Thank you. Enjoy spring break.